It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when my entire world shifted on its axis. I was standing in my kitchen, the kind of small, lived-in kitchen where every scratch on the countertop told a story of 30 years of love, sacrifice, and simple meals. The afternoon sun was pouring through the window above the sink, hitting the ceramic bowls Henry bought me decades ago. Those bowls still held fresh fruit. Those bowls were still doing their job. Unlike me, I guess. My son Oliver walked in without knocking. He never did anymore. He had this new way of moving through my home, like he already owned it. His shoes were expensive. His watch was the kind I saw on billboards at the hospital where I worked. Everything about him screamed success, but there was something hollow in his eyes that scared me more than anything. I dried my hands on the dish towel and turned to greet him. I was about to ask if he wanted something to eat, if he was hungry, the kind of automatic question mothers ask their children even when those children are grown men in tailored suits. But before I could speak, Oliver's voice cut through the quiet kitchen like a knife. From now on, I want her paycheck sent to my account. I stood there frozen, the water from my hands still dripping onto the linoleum floor. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. Surely, he didn't just say what I think he said. But the look on his face told me everything. He wasn't joking.
He wasn't testing me.
He meant every single word. I'll handle all your bills from now on, Mom. Your mortgage, your utilities, everything. It'll be easier if I manage it all. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was explaining why the sky was blue. Like this was reasonable. Like this was love. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the sink. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him who he thought he was, who he thought I was. I wanted to remind him of every sleepless night, every double shift, every time I came home with my feet aching and my heart aching even more because I missed watching him grow up. I wanted to tell him about the bills I paid while he was in college, the nights I chose soup instead of a meal so he could have new textbooks, the dreams I buried so deep I almost forgot I had them. But what came out was different. What came out was quiet. If that's what you think is best, son, I said, and I even smiled a little, that sad smile mothers perfect over decades of swallowing their own pain. He nodded, satisfied. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just said he had to leave, that Serena was waiting, and then he was gone, his expensive shoes clicking across my kitchen floor one last time before the door closed behind him. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom under the pale moonlight streaming through the window, and something inside me shifted. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity, in a kind of awakening that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. He had no idea what I was keeping from him. He had absolutely no idea what he'd just set in motion. So tell me, would you ever hand your hard-earned money to your child like that? What would you do in this situation? Tell me what's on your mind in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because Martha's story is just getting started, and trust me, you're going to want to see what happens next. I need to take you back. Not to that Tuesday, but years before. Back to when Oliver was 7 years old, and Henry was still alive, still here, still the man I believed would grow old beside me and watch our son become something remarkable. Henry was a carpenter. Honest work. The kind of work that built things that lasted. He'd leave every morning with his tools and come home with sawdust in his hair and pride in his eyes. We weren't rich. We didn't have much beyond a small house, a reliable car, and each other. But we had everything that mattered. Then one October morning, Henry felt a strange pain in his chest. I remember because I was serving scrambled eggs. He said it was nothing, probably just a muscle from the job. By that evening, he was gone. A stroke. Massive and sudden. Like God flipped a switch, and our entire life went dark. I was 32 years old with a 7-year-old son, and a mortgage that wasn't going to pay itself. So, I did what mothers do. I got up. I worked. I became a nurse at St. Michael's Hospital because the pay was decent and they had flexible shifts. I worked nights mostly, the kind of shifts nobody wanted, the kind that paid a little more. I'd tuck Oliver into bed, wait until his breathing got soft and steady, Then I'd drive to the hospital and spend my hours keeping other people alive while my own son slept in the dark. It was lonely. God, it was lonely. There were nights I'd sit in the break room and cry quietly so no one would hear. There were mornings I'd come home to find Oliver had made himself cereal for breakfast, his small hands unable to reach the good bowls, using the chipped ones from the lower cabinet instead. Those mornings broke my heart a little bit more than the last, but I kept going. Because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice things we don't even know we're sacrificing until it's too late to get them back. Oliver was brilliant in school. That was the bright spot, the thing that made all those sleepless nights mean something. He'd bring home straight A's, and his teachers would tell me he was special, that he had potential. I'd feel this swell of pride so big it could burst my chest open. Here was proof that I was doing something right. Here was proof that all those nights working double shifts were worth it. He'd hug me at night and say, "I'm going to make you proud, Mom. I'm going to be somebody." And I'd believe him completely. I'd smooth his hair back from his forehead and think, yes, this boy is going to have everything Henry and I couldn't. This boy is going to be free. But the boy I raised was slowly disappearing. The boy who'd sit with me in the kitchen and help me plan meals on a tight budget was being replaced by someone I didn't quite recognize. And I didn't even notice it happening. Can you relate to that feeling of losing someone while they're still standing right in front of you? Tell me in the comments if you've experienced that heartbreak. And make sure you're subscribed because Martha's story shows us just how deep this wound goes.
College was when everything changed.
I still remember driving him to campus, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs to his dorm room, trying not to cry in front of him because he needed to feel like this was an adventure, not another loss in our family. His roommate was named Chad. Chad's family had money. Real money. The kind that comes with connections and country clubs and the assumption that the world belongs to you. Within weeks, Oliver had traded his scholarship gratitude for designer envy. He started talking differently. He stopped calling on Sunday nights like I'd asked. His letters became less about classes and more about who had what, who was dating whom, whose family owned which business. I'd read those letters in my small kitchen, and I'd feel something hardening in my chest. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like disappointment mixed with fear. Fear that I'd somehow failed him by not being rich, by not being enough. Then came winter break. He came home, and I barely recognized him. It wasn't just the expensive clothes or the way he wore them like armor. It was the distance. Literal distance. He'd sit at our kitchen table with his eyes somewhere else, somewhere above this place, above me. He'd pick at the home-cooked meals I made with ingredients chosen carefully from the sale section, like the food itself was beneath him now. One night, I overheard him on the phone in his room. He was talking to Chad. And he was laughing. Not a warm laugh. A mocking laugh. He was describing my life. My small house. My job as a nurse. My used car with the dent on the side from when I'd hit a parking sign trying to park after a double shift. My mom works at a hospital, he said, and something in his tone made it sound like I worked in a coal mine. She's just simple, you know? She doesn't get the world like we do. Simple. That word hit me like a slap. I stood in that dark hallway outside his closed door, and something cracked inside me. Not the kind of crack you can fix. The kind that changes the structure of everything. He wasn't just becoming someone new. He was becoming someone who was ashamed of me, of where he came from, of the sacrifices that had shaped him. That night, I cried in my bedroom not because he'd changed, but because I realized he might never come back. The boy I knew was already gone, and this stranger wearing his face might never find his way home. But I didn't know that things were about to get so much worse. I had no idea what kind of influence was waiting in the wings, ready to pull him even further away from everything we were. Stay tuned because the next chapter will introduce someone who accelerated Oliver's descent into darkness, and let me tell you, her name was Serena. Don't miss it. Hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs to see what happens next. Serena showed up in Oliver's life during his junior year. He called me to tell me about her with a strange new brightness in his voice, the kind of brightness that made my stomach clench. From the moment I met her, I knew she was different. Not good different. Different. She had the kind of beauty that made people uncomfortable, the kind that came with sharp edges and sharper judgment. She dressed like she was born knowing the exact price of everything. And she looked at my small house the way someone might look at a ruin. I tried anyway. I cooked her favorite meal, something I'd researched carefully, spending more on ingredients than I should have. I made sure my hair was fixed, that I was wearing the nice blouse Henry had bought me years ago. I wanted to show her that I was worth knowing, that Oliver's mother had value even if I didn't wear designer labels. She picked at the food with a fork like she was moving garbage around a plate. "It's very homemade," she said, and somehow she made it sound like an insult. Oliver laughed nervously and changed the subject. I felt my heart shrink a little smaller in my chest. Over the next months, Serena weaseled deeper into our family like ivy growing on brick, slowly choking out everything it touches. She whispered things to Oliver when she thought I couldn't hear. She made jokes about my car, my clothes, my job. And Oliver started repeating them back to me, his own mockery mixed with hers until I couldn't tell where her cruelty ended and his began. The worst part came during a Sunday dinner. Serena casually mentioned that her parents wanted to buy Oliver a new car for graduation. Then she looked at me and said, "It's nice when parents can actually help their children succeed." The implication was clear. I hadn't done enough. I wasn't enough. Oliver didn't correct her. He didn't defend me. He just smiled and talked about leather interiors and horsepower while I sat there pushing food around my plate like Serena had taught me to do. Then came the conversation that changed everything. Oliver told me they were thinking about buying a house together. His idea, he said, but I knew it was hers. And to make that happen, he needed money. A lot of it. He wanted to sell my house. The house Henry built memories in. The house where Oliver learned to ride a bike, where I taught him to cook, where I'd held him every night for months after his father died. "Mom, it's just a house," he said, like bricks and mortar didn't hold the ghosts of everyone we'd loved. "We could get you an apartment somewhere. Somewhere small but nice. You don't need all this space." I looked at him in that moment, this man I'd sacrificed everything for, and I saw greed flicker across his face like a flame catching on dry kindling. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The greed never went out again. It just burned brighter, consuming everything it touched, including him. What would you do if your own child showed their true colors like this? If you realized they valued money more than they valued you? Tell me in the comments below. And subscribe because what happens next will absolutely shake you to your core. Martha finally stops being the victim, and trust me, you don't want to miss this turning point. The confrontation came on a Wednesday. Oliver showed up at my house without warning, and I knew before he even opened his mouth that this was it. This was the moment everything would change. This was the moment he'd push, and we'd both find out if I was going to push back or crumble. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mom, we need to talk about your finances," he said, sitting at my kitchen table like it was a boardroom. "You're not getting younger. You can't keep working those brutal shifts. It's not sustainable. I'm worried about you." The concern in his voice was so thick, so performed, that I almost laughed.
This wasn't about me.
This was about access. This was about control. "And what do you suggest?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer, already having thought about this moment 1,000 times since that Tuesday when he first dropped the bomb. "I handle everything," he said, pulling out papers he'd already prepared, already drafted, already decided. "Your paycheck goes to my account. I pay your bills. I manage your investments. Think of it as letting me take care of you the way you took care of me." There it was. The manipulation wrapped in a bow of filial duty. The theft dressed up as love. My hands trembled. Not from fear. From something else. Something hot and sharp and necessary. I looked at my son, this man I'd bled for, this man I'd given my best years to, and I saw the full picture for the first time.
He didn't want to help me. He wanted to own me.
He wanted to reduce me from a person to a line item he could control, move around, delete if necessary. "If that's what you think is best, son," I said, and I smiled. Not a real smile. The smile I'd perfected over decades of hiding my own pain. "I trust you." He relaxed visibly. He thought he'd won. He pulled out a pen and slid the papers across to me. Just sign these, and it all goes through by Friday.
I signed them. Carefully. Deliberately.
While inside, something was shifting. While inside, I was becoming someone new. Not someone broken. Someone awake. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The afternoon light had changed. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the floor. And in those shadows, I made a decision. That night, under the pale moonlight streaming through my bedroom window, I pulled out something I hadn't looked at in years. Something I'd hidden so carefully that even I sometimes forgot it was there. And that's when everything became clear. He believed he owned me now. But what he didn't know, what he'd never know, was that I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. And soon, very soon, he would learn exactly who held all the power in this game. So here's my question for you. If you discovered that someone had manipulated you into handing over control of your life, how would you respond? Would you stay silent, or would you fight back? Let me know in the comments, and make absolutely sure you're subscribed, because in the next chapter, Martha reveals the secret that changes everything. This is where the real story begins. That night, sitting alone in the darkness of my bedroom, I pulled out something I hadn't touched in 15 years. A metal box. Simple, unassuming, the kind of thing nobody would ever think to look for hiding in the back of my closet behind winter coats and old photo albums. Inside was a letter from Henry, written 2 months before he died, in his careful handwriting on yellowed paper. I'd almost forgotten it was there, had pushed it so far down in my mind that it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The letter explained everything. Henry had put money aside. Not a lot by some people's standards, but everything by ours. He'd been working extra jobs on weekends, picking up projects his boss threw his way. Money that was supposed to go toward renovating the kitchen, or taking me on a trip somewhere nice. But instead, he'd done something I never knew about. He'd set up a trust fund. For Oliver, he wrote. For Oliver's future. But if something ever happened to me, if Martha ever needed it, it was hers too. He'd written the letter because he had a bad feeling, he said. He couldn't explain it. He just felt like he needed to make sure I'd be taken care of. That our son would be taken care of. Henry had died a week after writing that letter. Over the years, I'd let that money sit. I'd worked, I'd sacrificed, I'd built a life with my own 2 hands, because accepting Henry's last gift felt like accepting that he was really gone. It was easier to pretend it didn't exist. But it had been growing. Quietly. Patiently. Compounding interest in accounts nobody knew about. By the time Oliver handed me those papers to sign, that trust fund had become something else entirely. It had become my freedom. I pulled out my laptop and logged into accounts I hadn't checked in years. The numbers made my breath catch. I'm not going to tell you the exact amount, because it doesn't matter. What matters is that I was never as vulnerable as Oliver thought I was. I was never as trapped as he'd tried to make me. He believed he owned me now. He believed he'd finally gotten what he wanted, control over the woman who'd controlled his life for so long. But what he didn't know, what he could never have known, was that I'd been preparing for this moment my whole life. Not intentionally. Not because I could see the future. But because Henry had seen something I couldn't, and he'd made sure I'd survive whatever came next. I sat there in the dark with my fingers on the keyboard, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger anymore. Not sadness. Something cleaner. Something colder. Something that felt a lot like power. Have you ever realized that the thing you thought was your weakness was actually your greatest strength? Tell me in the comments if you've had that moment. But don't go anywhere, because what Martha does next will show you exactly what happens when a woman stops playing by the rules. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because you absolutely don't want to miss the next chapter, where Martha's quiet revolution begins. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I'd never done before. I lied. Not big, dramatic lies. Just small ones. Consistent ones. I told Oliver I'd gotten a raise. I told him I'd paid some bills early. I acted grateful for his control, thanked him for taking care of me, played the part of the relieved mother finally free from burden. And while I was playing that part, I was working. I hired a lawyer. Not an expensive one, but a smart one. We transferred money from my hidden accounts into new accounts, secret ones, accounts registered under a company name so obscure and boring that nobody would ever think to look there. I consolidated everything every penny Henry had left me, every extra shift I'd worked and saved, every small sacrifice compounded into something substantial. Oliver's arrogance grew faster than I could have imagined. With control over my visible finances, he started talking differently. He'd call me and tell me about the house he was buying with Serena. He'd brag about his position at the company, about the deals he was closing, about how smart he was for taking control of his mother's life like this. He'd become someone's version of success, someone's idea of a man in control. But I knew something he didn't. I knew that arrogance is just another word for blindness. Meanwhile, I kept my job. I kept going to the hospital, kept working my shifts, kept living my small, quiet life on the surface. But underneath, I was moving pieces around on a board he didn't even know we were playing on. Every day, I'd come home from work and spend an hour or two making sure my real money was exactly where it needed to be. Making sure nothing could touch it. Making sure that when the moment came, I'd be ready. I also started doing something else. I began reading about Oliver's company. Really reading. Not the promotional stuff on their website, but the financial filings, the business news, the industry blogs where people talked about what was really happening behind closed doors. There were whispers, rumors about corners being cut, discussions about the kind of business practices that looked good on paper but were rotten underneath. I didn't know it at the time, but those whispers were about to become screams. Every time Oliver smiled at me now, every time he bragged about the new car or the investment he'd made, I could see the trap tightening.
Not around me.
Around him. He was walking straight into something, and he didn't even know it was coming. I was calm. I was patient. I was the most dangerous thing in his life, and he had no idea. What do you think was coming for Oliver? Take a guess in the comments and let me know if you think Martha knew what was about to happen. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the next chapter brings everything crashing down, and it's going to be absolutely devastating. Don't miss it. A year passed. During that year, I became someone I didn't recognize. Not in a bad way. I became someone solid. Someone with agency. Someone who didn't apologize for existing. I'd go to work, come home, manage my hidden empire, and play the role of grateful mother whenever Oliver called. Then one Tuesday morning, my phone rang while I was on break at the hospital. It was a number I didn't recognize. A lawyer. He was calling because Oliver's company had been under federal investigation for the last 6 months.
Fraud. White fraud.
Embezzlement. A systematic scheme where money meant for clients was being funneled into personal accounts. Oliver's accounts. He'd been arrested that morning. I sat in the break room with my hand shaking, the phone pressed against my ear, and I felt something I wasn't expecting. Not joy. Not satisfaction.
Heartbreak.
Real, genuine heartbreak. Because despite everything he'd done, despite the way he'd tried to own me, he was still my son. And he was about to lose everything. Serena left him before his arraignment. I found that out through the news. She'd already moved on to some other wealthy man, some other stepping stone. Just like that, the woman who'd spent years tearing down my family decided the family wasn't worth staying for. Oliver called me 3 days later from a lawyer's office. His voice was different. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like a child's voice. Almost like the boy I'd raised before the world got its hooks in him. "Mom," he said, and he was crying now. "I need help. I have a lawyer, but I can't afford him. The company seized my accounts. They took the car, the house. Everything. Mom, I don't have anything left." I closed my eyes. I thought about all the nights I'd worked double shifts. I thought about all the ways I'd given and given and given. I thought about Henry looking down from wherever he was, wondering what his trust fund would be used for. "Come home," I said quietly. "We'll figure this out." He came home that weekend, and I barely recognized him. This man in an expensive suit that was now his only remaining possession. This man who'd tried to control me, now sitting at my kitchen table looking smaller than he had since he was a boy. I made him dinner. The kind of simple meal he'd learned to mock. And while we ate, I said something that made him go completely still. "Oliver," I said softly, "haven't you been managing my accounts? Didn't you tell me you had control of all my finances?" His face went white. He realized in that moment what I was about to say. He realized he'd given me power over him without ever knowing he was doing it. "Mom," he started, but I held up my hand.
I'm sorry, honey.
"I have to go to the authorities. They'll want to see all the financial records. Everything. My accounts. Your access to my accounts. All of it." I watched my son's world collapse completely. Not because I was cruel, but because actions have consequences. Because the moment you decide to control someone else, you become vulnerable to being controlled yourself. The next morning, federal agents came to my house with Oliver still asleep upstairs. They needed access to everything. They needed to see what he'd been doing with my accounts, if he'd been funneling money from me the way he'd funneled it from his company's clients. When they pulled up the records, when they saw that I'd moved everything, that I'd protected myself, that everything was exactly where it should be, they realized something. This woman had known. This woman had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. Are you starting to see how this ends? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Will Oliver face real consequences? Will Martha finally find peace? Subscribe right now and turn on those notifications because you will not believe what comes next. This story's ending will shake you to your core. Don't miss a single moment. Share this with someone who needs to know that sometimes the sweetest justice comes to those who wait. The legal battles took months. Oliver faced charges not just from the federal government, but from his own company and its clients. His lawyer tried to cut deals, tried to convince him to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. But the damage was already done. The evidence was overwhelming. Throughout it all, I did something that surprised everyone around me, including myself. I didn't fight against him in court. I didn't testify against my own son. I simply cooperated with investigators, provided my financial records, and let the truth speak for itself. Oliver was sentenced to 4 years in a federal penitentiary. The day the sentence was read, I sat in the back of the courtroom and I cried. Not tears of victory, tears of loss. Because even though he'd betrayed me, even though he'd tried to steal my agency, he was still my son. And watching him walk out of that courtroom in handcuffs felt like losing him all over again. Within a month of his conviction, I made a decision that changed everything. I put my house on the market, the house Henry had built memories in, the house I'd worked so hard to hold on to. But it held too many ghosts now. Too many versions of Oliver who would never come back. I sold it for more than I expected because the market had shifted, because time had made it valuable in ways I'd never anticipated. With the money from the sale and the inheritance Henry had left me, I bought something new. A small cottage by the ocean. Not in some fancy beach town, but in a quiet place where nobody knew my name and I could start again from scratch. The day I moved in, I stood on the porch and looked out at the waves. The sound of the ocean replaced the sound of Oliver's demands. The salty air replaced the weight I'd been carrying for so long. For the first time in years, I felt light. I felt free. I felt like myself. I got a new job at a smaller hospital closer to the coast. Better hours. Better pay. And, importantly, a place where nobody knew my story. Nobody knew I was a mother whose son had betrayed her. Nobody knew I was the victim of a con so close to home. They just knew me as Martha, the quiet nurse with the kind eyes who came in and did her job well and didn't ask for much. I made new friends. A woman named Carol who worked in the gift shop downstairs. A man named David who was a retired teacher and came in twice a week as a volunteer. People who wanted to know me for who I was now, not for my sacrifices or my heartbreak. The ocean became my therapy. I'd walk along the beach in the early mornings before my shifts, and I'd feel something healing inside me. Not forgetting. Never forgetting. But healing. I visited Oliver once. 6 months into a sentence. I sat across from him in the visiting room, and I barely recognized the person looking back at me. He was thin. His eyes were empty. But there was also something else there. Something that looked like understanding. like he was finally getting it. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and his voice was so small, so broken. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you, for trying to control you, for being ashamed of you. You gave me everything, and I threw it away like it meant nothing." I reached across the table, and I took his hand. "I know you are," I said. "And someday when you get out of here, you're going to have to figure out how to live with that. How to make amends. Not to me. I've already forgiven you. But to yourself. You have to forgive yourself."
He cried then.
My son cried like the boy he used to be, like the hurt he'd caused had finally caught up with him. The sound of waves replaced everything. The guilt, the anger, the resentment. The waves just kept coming and going, and I finally understood that this is what forgiveness looks like. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's accepting that it did, and choosing to move forward anyway. I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. My son would survive too, but on his own terms now, without my life to lean on. Do you believe people can truly change? Can Oliver come out of prison a better man? Tell me what you think will happen to him next. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your stories matter. Your experiences matter. And right now, someone out there needs to hear them. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss another story of courage, redemption, and quiet justice. We have more stories coming, and I need you to be part of this family.
Tell someone you love about this video.
Share it. Because sometimes the best thing we can do for each other is remind ourselves that we're not alone in our struggles. Hit that subscribe button right now. 5 years later, I sat in my cottage by the ocean and looked at the life I'd built. It wasn't the life I'd expected, but it was real. It was mine. And that made it precious in a way I'd never understood before. I'd learned something profound through all of this, something that nobody warns you about when you're young and idealistic and ready to sacrifice everything for love. Love without boundaries is not love. It's servitude. And when you serve without expecting anything in return, when you give without reservation, you create a dynamic where the other person starts to believe they deserve it. They believe you exist to serve them. They believe they have power over you that they can't possibly have. What I learned was this. Love is a transaction. Not in the monetary sense, but in the spiritual sense. It requires give and take. It requires balance. Oliver's problem, and my problem, was that I'd given and given while he'd taken and taken. By the end, there was nothing left but resentment on both sides. Henry used to say that the best way to teach someone to be a good person is to show them their own power. Not power over others, but power over their own lives. By taking control, Oliver had robbed himself of that opportunity. By refusing to have boundaries, I'd robbed both of us. I didn't blame myself anymore. That took years of therapy and ocean walks and conversations with Carol and David and the life I was building. But I got there. I forgave myself the way I'd forgiven my son. The penitentiary released Oliver on a Tuesday morning, 3 years early for good behavior. He'd spent his time reading, working in the prison library, going to therapy groups. He'd done the work. Real work. He didn't come to find me right away. That showed wisdom. He spent his first month rebuilding his relationship with himself, getting a job in a warehouse, living in a halfway house, not reaching for his mother to fix things like he would have done before. But then, on a Thursday evening, I got a letter. Real paper. Real ink. In his handwriting, he wrote, "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness because I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all along. That hard work has dignity. That sacrifice means something. That being proud of where you come from is not weakness. I'm trying to build a good life now. A simple life. An honest life. I'm selling the few possessions I have left, and I'm thinking about going back to school. I want to learn a trade, something real, something Henry would have been proud of. I don't know if we'll ever have the relationship we had when I was young. That boy is gone. But maybe we can build something new. Something better. Something true. I hope you let me try." I read that letter sitting on my porch with the ocean in front of me and tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness. Tears of something I'd been afraid to hope for. Healing. Real, genuine healing. I wrote him back. I told him I would let him try. I told him I was proud of him for doing the work. I told him that Henry would be proud too. I didn't say I was ready to have him in my life immediately, but I said I was open. I said I was willing to see who he was becoming. And that's the thing about quiet justice. It's not about revenge. It's not about winning or losing. It's about revealing the truth and letting people see themselves clearly. Revenge is loud. Revenge is messy. Revenge is just more damage. But justice, real justice, the kind that lasts, that's the kind that comes from standing in your own power and letting the consequences fall where they may. I learned that some people come into our lives to teach us about ourselves. Oliver taught me that I was stronger than I believed. He taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. He taught me that love requires boundaries, or it becomes poison. And I hope that somewhere out there, someone is watching this story and realizing something about their own situation. If you're in a relationship where you're giving everything and getting nothing in return, if you're afraid to set boundaries because you're afraid of losing someone, I'm telling you right now, you're already losing them. You're just losing yourself in the process. Stand up. Take your power back. You deserve it. Your life deserves it. The waves still crash outside my window. The sun still sets over the ocean every single night. And I'm finally at peace. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching Martha's journey, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on your notifications so you never miss another story. We have so many more stories coming about people who found their power, who discovered their strength, who learned that quiet justice is always the sweetest justice. And please share this video with someone you love. Someone who needs to hear it. Because right now, there's someone out there sitting in a kitchen feeling small, feeling powerless, not knowing that they're about to become the strongest person in the room. They need to hear this story. They need to know they're not alone. Tell me in the comments, what did this story teach you about boundaries? About love? About power? I read every single comment. Your stories matter. Your experiences matter. This is a family, and families share their truths with each other.
Subscribe now.
Turn on those notifications. And I'll see you in the next story of Quiet Justice. Because Martha's journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning, and believe me, the best is yet to come.